How you doing, everybody? Andrew Scott, and you are back at the VO Booth Camp. You know, the biggest struggle that we in the home voiceover industry often have is that of environment. And you've heard me bang on and on about how you should really invest in taking care of your environment first so that you can really make the most of the microphone that you have. And I still to this day wish people would listen to me more about that, but you know, everybody sees a microphone and goes, ooh, pretty, and ooh, expensive, so it's going to be better, right? Well, you know, the truth of the matter is, really, your microphone is only as good as your environment. But to be fair, a lot of times you can't really do much about your environment. Maybe you're in an apartment, or maybe you live with a bunch of other people like I do, and you don't have the luxury of being able to dedicate a closet and turn it into a booth, or any of a number of other solutions, let alone investing in something like a, $8,000 to $10,000 whisper booth, right? Or maybe you don't have the skills to build one yourself, and you're going to be dealing with environmental noise. Now, most people who investigate home voiceover immediately look to CARDIOID condenser microphones, right? Or what Ali Amazanababa refers to as a studio microphone. Well, first off, any microphone is a studio microphone. And number two, when you hear the word cardioid, it sounds really, really, like, ooh, that's a special, it's a special word, but all it means is heart-shaped, right? And that's the pickup style or the sensitivity lobe of the microphone. And for example, y'all have seen this many times on the show. This is my trusty Lewitt 441 Flex. And again, to reiterate, the 441 is really not much different than the 440, except for the fact that it's got switchable or dialable patterns, built into it. And honestly, side by side, and I will be doing this at some point in the future, side by side, the difference between the 240 and the 440 is pretty slim. But this is a traditional cardioid condenser microphone. And you have seen it on the channel here a few times, but this is really the first time that I'm doing nothing by way of treatment on this. The only thing that this has on it right now, and actually let me confirm that because I might be talking out, one side of my ear, is it's got a little bit of a noise gate on it. Now, in a second, I'm going to shut that noise gate off so you can hear what my environment actually sounds like. Might as well do that now. So this is what my studio sounds like. Now, in fairness, it's treated in here. I mean, you can see probably, or have seen, I'll put a picture up on the video here. It's got some treatment, and it's even got some of the foam that I say doesn't do anything. Well, I still stand by that, but it does a little bit, and it helps in here a little bit. But I've done other acoustic treatments in here so that the foam isn't trying to do all the work. But I wanted you guys to be able to hear what this environment alone sounds like. And let's have a listen. So unlike many other times when I'm recording, I didn't tell my family to shut up, and I didn't have them close all the doors and turn off the furnace. Because this, I want to be a kind of a real world kind of demonstration. Now, again, this is a condenser microphone, and it's going to be picking up sound in a heart shape that comes out here. Now, you probably noticed as I moved away from the microphone, it got a little bit thinner sounding, right? Now, I have the gain on this microphone set currently at 40 dB, which is a little low, but I didn't want to bump it up too high and exacerbate the sound of the room. Now, everything else that I'm going to be doing here has nothing by way of processing on it. The only thing that I'm going to be doing is a little bit of gain matching and maybe a little bit of gain staging in order to try to even out the playing field. But cardioid condensers are not the only game when it comes to doing voiceover. So what am I talking about? Now it's time for me to get the cans on. So these are dynamic microphones. And I'm sure you've, heard about these microphones at some point in the past, and you probably, as far as your voiceover practice goes, you wrote them off in your head thinking, oh, they're podcast microphones. They're for broadcast work. Now, the truth of the matter is, there's very little difference between a condenser microphone and a dynamic microphone on paper. Now, you're probably familiar with the fact that a condenser microphone requires something called phantom power, or sometimes referred to as 48V for 48 volt. And that's because these condenser microphones are made to be very, very sensitive, and sensitive in many different directions. Now, we've got the cardioid heart shape, but you could also have a figure eight. You could have a omnidirectional, which is picking up sound from all sides equally, and so on and so on. There are a number of different types. But in order to achieve that sensitivity, there's very little by way of self-power that happens inside a condenser microphone. It requires 48 volts being put into it in order for you to be able to hear, or in our case, record the signal. But dynamic microphones are different. They have different capsules and, on whole, different electronics inside them. And they don't require as much voltage as a condenser microphone does. And as a matter of fact, some smaller, cheaper dynamic microphones don't require any voltage at all. They can be passive, what are referred to as passive dynamic microphones. They're not really salient to our discussion, and you'd never ever use them in home voiceover except for maybe like recording some kind of cheesy sounding special effect. But what I wanted you to take into consideration today, if you are a person who's trying to get into the home VO business and you have a lot of environmental challenges, dynamic microphones, the trade-off between a dynamic microphone and a condenser microphone is that dynamic microphones, by design, don't pick up as detailed a sound as condensers do. Now when we think about voice acting and doing character work and, even things like audiobooks, we think we want just the most detailed sound. We want to hear every single thing. Truth of the matter is, no, you don't. If you are in a challenging environment, a condenser microphone is going to have no discrimination between sounds, between your voice, between the sound of the dryer, between the sound of the crying kids out in the street. It's going to pick up all the sound in your environment. Dynamic microphones are by design able to reject a lot of sound, and they just often get overlooked in home voice work. As a matter of fact, to this day, they often get overlooked in music studio production. Unless you know some secrets. There are a lot of world-class, really famous songs that you're familiar with that were recorded, the vocals and possibly some of the instrumentation have been recorded with dynamic microphones, expressly for the reason that they reject every sound in the environment except the one that's pointing straight into them. Now, I'm not going to go into a huge detailed rundown of these microphones, except to say that these are 4 of the most noted dynamic microphones on the market today. We've got the Shure MV7, and this is particularly the MV7X, which is the XLR version. There is also a USB version of this microphone. And from what I've heard and what I've read and seen from other people, the sound difference is virtually indistinguishable. Now over here, we have the ELECTRO-VOICE RE320. Now, the ELECTRO-VOICE RE20 is a world-famous broadcast dynamic microphone. You see them all the time. Big and high-end podcasters use them, and they have a little bit of visual cachet to go with them. But ELECTRO-VOICE is one of the oldest microphone manufacturers in the business, and there's no arguing that the RE320 is a worthy successor to the RE20. Now, the differences between the two are pretty minimal. There is some audible difference in them. I've, seen and heard other YouTubers that have done side-by-side shootouts on them, but it's not super great. The RE20 has a little bit more detail in it, but that comes at a price. The RE320 is very reasonably priced and performs about as well as an RE20 does. Now, on the end here, we've got what I jokingly refer to as Hammer of the Gods. This is the classic Shure SM7B. Now, again, with the podcasters, you tend to see all the big famous podcast people are often using a Shure SM7B. And it does have a distinct sound. It sounds like an SM7B. And honestly, a lot of other microphones to this day are still trying to equate that sound. But obviously I have it here because you've seen and heard me use it before, and it's worthy to be put into the mix because of the 4 of these microphones, not including my Lewitt, out of the 4 of these microphones, the SM7B still costs what it costs. It costs around $400 to get one new. But this little guy here is special. This is a Behringer XM8500, and it's one of my favorite microphones. I use my XM8500s for my podcast studio, which is behind me, when I've got multiple guests. It's a great little microphone, and you might think that it looks like a stage microphone, and, with good reason. That's the form factor that it has. But it's a surprising little microphone for a number of reasons. The key reason I'll get to in a second. But, you've seen me, I'm switching back and forth between microphones, but I want you to pay attention to what you hear in between the words. And I'll be bumping up I'll be maximizing the floor sound in the studio so that you can really hear what's going on in the background or between the words, as it were. So right now, you hear me on my Lewitt 441 Flex, and this is what my environment sounds like. Okay. If I were recording an audiobook with this in this environment right now, I'd have my work cut out for me. There's a lot of room going on, okay? And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Again, part of me wanted to do this demo out in my kitchen, right? But this is what I would say for treatment inside my studio here. The treatment that I accomplished in here, anybody could do for around $200, okay? So I didn't break the bank in order to treat the walls in this space to one degree or another. Sounds pretty good. Sounds okay, but it's still pretty noisy. The noise floor is higher than I'd like it to be. It's higher than negative 60 decibels. But now, let's start doing some side-by-side comparison with these guys. So, okay, so that's mic A. Here's mic B. Okay, mic C. And mic D. Okay, so there's samples of each floor for each respective microphone. And, in this ridiculous looking setup that I've got going here that I'm pretty concerned and convinced is going to collapse at any moment, I've got these things staged about the same distance from my face. And, that's for a point. I wanted to have each capsule a given distance away from my face. Now, often you'll think of dynamic microphones as having that broadcast sound, right? Okay. The truth of the matter is that broadcast sound gets accomplished in 2 ways or by 2 means. Number one is all the outboard processing that, they go into. They're run into a compressor, at least one compressor, possibly a noise gate or expander, and a number of other outboard processes before it even gets recorded or broadcast at a radio station. The other reason why they sound that way, though, really comes down to how the person or how the on-air talent is using them. If you get right up on a dynamic microphone, it's going to sound like you're on the radio. And that has to do with the distance between your lips and the front of the microphone and the proximity effect that this microphone might carry. And really, all you need to do to reduce that broadcast sound is just back away from the mic a little bit. And if you stay in line with the microphone, really at that point, what you're doing is you're still getting a very good pickup, but you're not getting all that bass. You're not getting everything sub 300 hertz barreling into that microphone. It's just going to record more like a condenser microphone. But at the same time, it's still going to be rejecting much more sound than a condenser microphone will. And so really what I want you to consider is if you're in a challenging environment, you might want to look into a dynamic microphone, because all these microphones, which, and again, I'll leave the decision of which sounds best up to you, but all these microphones really accomplish about the same thing. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to run all 4 of these microphones and identify which one I'm using. And then we'll wrap up after this. But I'm just going to use my standard boilerplate thing that I say on a microphone. 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Do me a favor, hit me down in the comments and tell me which one you liked the best, or if you could tell the difference, or if the difference really matters to you. Because truthfully, I've used, aside from one microphone, I've used all of these microphones to record audiobooks for Audible with absolutely no problem by way of my recorded fidelity. Never had anything kick back. These all sound really similar, but these types of microphones back in the day for me really helped me out of a jam by way of the environmental problems that I had when I was recording. So, all the imagery that I showed you, and I'll put up some specs on these things in the details below, but all of these are really worthy to consider when it comes to getting started in voiceover. Don't fall for what everybody else says you must have. What it really comes down to is, can you get the right clarity out of a microphone in the environment that you have to work in that is acceptable to either the platform that you're deploying the audiobook to or the person or company who's hiring you to do the work? That's all that matters. And all these microphones, even though they might have characteristic sound profiles to them, they're all quality microphones. And none of these microphones are over $400. And this is the big exception on the high end. This is $400. But this guy here costs less than $30. Don't fall for it when people say, oh, brand name only manufactures garbage. Manufacturing quality has jumped up a big amount in the last couple years alone. So there are some real serious considerations in the lower price points that can help you get started. But do me a favor, if you've got anything of value out of this video, I'd really appreciate a like, click, and definitely a subscribe. Those subscriptions really help me keep making this kind of content. Not because I'm getting any money, because I'm not a monetized channel, but they really help me grow and they help me know what you guys value. So until next time, everybody, this is Andrew Scott, and you've been at the VO Booth Camp. See you later, campers. Bye-bye.